Okay, this is a very important gesture, this legislative change that you're proposing. But what are the chances of your primary coalition partner, the ANC, actually agreeing to this? I mean, I saw commentary that President Ramaphosa said he hasn't read the model legislation or the bill yet, but it must go through the normal parliamentary processes. Will you be able to convince the ANC to abandon its core policy pillar of B.E.E? Because, I mean, the primary beneficiary of B.E.E was Mr. Ramaphosa himself. And in the immediate aftermath of the DA's announcement, the Tripartite Alliance came out and said, no, this is B.E.E is critical for black advancement. ANC spokespeople said the same. And so one of my challenges to the DA is to say, well, if you are sincere in this commitment to non-racialism, which I think you ought to be, you said that you don't control the government, but you do control other spheres of government, Western Cape province, many cities and municipalities. And because of preferential procurement legislation that is now imposed on you, I would say be bold, be brave, and stop implementing B.E.E legislation where you govern. And my argument is you can end B.E.E on Monday morning by just refusing to implement it.
Yeah, well, politics is often a choice between being a prophet and being a statesman. The prophet is the idealist, and the test for the prophet is the purity of his ideas and the integrity of everything that goes together. A statesman is a pragmatist, and the statesman's challenge is how to usually avert the worst kind of situation. Participation in this government of national unity is not, in most part, an exercise in idealism. It is an exercise in pragmatism. And the risk at the outset of the GNU was that the DA, by participating in the system, would be locked in, and we would accept certain things as necessity because we're in there, and we sort of make an ideal out of necessity. Now, what we're trying to prevent is an EFF, MK, ANC stitch-up or some combination. It's not an exercise in idealism, it's an exercise in pragmatism. But what is encouraging, David, is in the first instance, we didn't ask ourselves, will we be able to convince the ANC? That did not influence the decision of the DA to come up with a wholesale challenge to the policy of black economic empowerment. Because firstly, you've got to determine what you believe and what you want to strive for. Your second consideration is within the constraints of the practicalities of power, how do you implement it? When Sakalicha won that case, setting aside the regulations to the Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act, terrible name. Like they give these things these obscure names, but essential what this act means, it's got a race-based equity pre-requirement or whatever they call it.
So you have to be 100% black owned, even to bid.
Yeah, you got to 100 before you even walk in the door. And that what it does is it narrows your pool of potential service providers and contractors.
Very much so.
So that you manage by the constraints of that smaller group instead of the bigger market. Anyway. When Sakalicha did that, there were two DA governments, metro governments, one in Cape Town, one in Tshwane. And both of us took advantage of that change to change our procurement regulations. In Tshwane, we still sort of, you're constrained because you've got to apply the law, but we took the advantage of removing requirements of ownership of war veterans. They had war veteran requirements in Tshwane for building bridges and stuff.
I thought war veterans were good at blowing up bridges.
Yeah.
Very good point. Well, the ANC is certainly good at blowing up public procurement.
Yeah.
And so we did, in a limited way, take the window of opportunity. And as we now speak, we've got this Public Procurement Act that's been passed, but there aren't any regulations to it yet. And it's in the regulations that these race-based requirements are implemented. So, David, I would say your challenge is good for the DA. Go and see how you can implement it. Go and see within the constraints of the system what you can do. The problem, though, is once you just say we simply disregard the national legislation, 2 days later you would be interdicted and you would end up in a fight that you lose at the outset, instead of having an opportunity to actually influence policy in an incremental way. But it is this Henry Kissinger-esque fight between being a prophet or a philosopher and being a statesman, and what can you actually get done in the constraints of your situation?
I'd say two things. The first is that the ANC doesn't seem to be very constrained by its own policy.
Yeah, because they're shameless. I mean, they are shameless, and there's almost an expectation. And very often we run to court because of their shamelessness, and we win because they disregard the rule of law. So unfortunately, we are in a bit of a, we are the good guys. We are the folks that hold up the rule of law as the standard. So we can't completely disregard it. Sorry, but I was interrupting you.
No. So if you have the moral argument on your side, you would have the backing of your voters and the citizenry more broadly. And I think that is also a fight worth having in the courts, is to say, like, actually, this is a dysfunctional system. It's premised on unconstitutional grounds. You could argue using Section 1 of the Constitution, non-racialism. And I think it's a fight worth having.
Yes.
And, also politics, as you would know, is about power, right? And there's the kind of legal architecture that implements that. But there's also a power game that's being had. And yes, I mean, I think you need to hold yourselves to a higher standard. You don't want to just say, well, the ANC embezzles 2 billion rand from a public hospital in Gauteng, so we're just going to let loose ourselves. But, there is a power game to be fought, and there you can force the agenda. And, if you consider the history of South Africa, there was a period from the 1970s to the 1980s that everybody kind of knew that the system wasn't really working.
And started disregarding it in small ways.
I mean, if John Cain Berman, who was the CEO of the Institute of Race Relations, where I once worked, he wrote a book called South Africa's Silent Revolution, which was about Black South Africans defying the population control laws and restrictions on freedom of movement to just move to the cities and to seek work. And so all of those petty apartheid laws, like you can't sit on this bench and you can't use this door or go to this beach,
can't host black guests at a hotel.
Yeah.
All of those things were disregarded.
And private organizations knew that this was a folly. This really wasn't based on anything sound, and they just started defying it. So I think that's what we need to do with B.E.E. I think the legislative proposals are really important to kind of set the agenda and to say, like, this is our alternative policy, because I think a lot of people say, yes, but what alternative is there to B.E.E.? Now you can show them. I have some reservations about things like the Sustainable Development Goals, and I understand why you put those in. But for me, free markets will deliver. You just say, get the state out of the way entirely. You don't need the government kind of picking winners and trying to manipulate outcomes. But putting that aside, I think B.E.E. needs to be delegitimized, not just through legislative change, but through social rejection, basically. And we need all South Africans to say, well, actually, look around you. Look around the world. There's been many countries that have come back from disaster. I mean, Japan suffered a nuclear holocaust in 1945. Germany was in ashes after the Nazis took over and they were then vanquished by the Allies. The whole of Eastern Europe was under the jackboot of Soviet communism. And a lot of those countries are now flourishing today. They're modern, sophisticated, liberal democracies that have succeeded. Look at all those Eastern European countries, which basically were liberated around the same time that South Africa found its freedom. So, I think we need to get away from the statist mentality that the government must deliver these things, because we need to be very blunt about the moral decay that has infused government. Like, this is a government that doesn't have your best interests at heart. It's fundamentally corrupted, not just that they kind of steal a bit of money. They're fundamentally morally corrupted. And so we need to reject this idea that the government will deliver. South Africans need to deliver for themselves at the individual level, at the community level, at the commercial level. And we have incredible opportunity in this country, but expecting the government to deliver prosperity and flourishing, you're going to be very disappointed.